On a quiet Sunday morning in St. Paul, Minnesota, City's Church was holding its regular worship service. Families gathered to sing, pray, and reflect, seeking peace and community. Suddenly, the calm was shattered as a group of protesters stormed in, their voices echoing through the sanctuary. Confusion swept over the congregation as the protesters shouted and chanted, halting the service. The protesters weren't there to worship, they had a message and wanted it heard. Tension replaced tranquility as the churchgoers faced an unexpected confrontation. The protest was tied to national debates about immigration and ICE, the government agency enforcing immigration laws. The protesters targeted City's Church because of its perceived connection to ICE activities in the area. A video of the incident quickly spread online, drawing attention far beyond St. Paul. The footage captured the chaos, the shouting, and the stunned reactions of the congregation. The story ignited debate about the right to protest versus the right to worship in peace. Questions arose. Where do these rights collide? Who decides what's acceptable? The incident at City's Church became a flashpoint in a much larger national conversation. It forced the community and the country to confront the tension between protest and religious freedom. The protesters entered City's Church with purpose, disrupting the Sunday service in a matter of seconds. Their shouts and slogans brought the worship to a standstill, leaving church members shocked and unsettled. Moving through the aisles, the protesters confronted individuals directly, making the disruption deeply personal. The video shows protesters pointing, shouting, and accusing the congregation of ignoring injustice. Children were frightened, families confused, and church leaders forced to respond on the spot. The protesters' goal was clear: force the congregation to confront their message about immigration and ICE. This was not a typical protest in a public square, it was a direct challenge inside a sacred space. By choosing the church, the protesters ensured their message would not be ignored. The disruption was loud, emotional, and unforgettable. Such protests inside places of worship are rare, making this event even more impactful. The protesters believed the church was complicit in the issues they opposed. Their actions guaranteed attention, but at the cost of peace and safety for the congregation. The church was left to grapple with the aftermath of a protest that crossed traditional boundaries. The protesters' language was sharp and accusatory. They called the congregation pretend Christians, challenging their faith and values. Accusations of being comfortable white people highlighted a perceived disconnect from the struggles of immigrants. The protesters claimed children were being put in concentration camps, using powerful language to shock and provoke. They accused the church of silence and complicity, even calling the pastor a collaborator with ICE. "You are fake Christians. You're sinners," one protester shouted, tying faith directly to action, or inaction, on immigration. These were not random outbursts. The protesters had a focused message. They believed the church was ignoring the suffering of immigrant families. Their words were chosen to provoke guilt, anger, and, above all, attention. The confrontation was intense, personal, and left the congregation reeling. The protesters' accusations forced the church to confront uncomfortable questions about its role in the community. The service became a battleground for competing visions of justice and faith. The protest was sparked by a specific claim that Pastor Jonathan Parnell was cooperating with ICE. This belief drove the protesters to interrupt the service, seeing the church as complicit in immigration enforcement. The timing was no accident. Federal immigration raids were reportedly happening in the area. Fear and anger over these raids fueled the protesters' determination. They saw the church as betraying its role as a sanctuary for the vulnerable. By protesting inside, they aimed to hold the church and its leadership publicly accountable. The protest was a direct response to what they saw as a moral failure. Pastor Parnell later denied the accusations, but the protesters acted on the information they had. For them, disrupting the service was necessary to expose what they believed was an injustice. The event became a symbol of the struggle over the moral responsibilities of religious institutions. In the days after the protest, Pastor Jonathan Parnell issued a strong statement. He described the protesters' actions as aggressive and confrontational, saying they accosted members of the congregation. Parnell emphasized the fear caused, especially among children, and called the protest intimidating and threatening. He condemned the protesters' conduct as shameful and unlawful, making clear the church would not tolerate such behavior. Parnell argued there was no justification, religious or legal, for invading a worship service. He defended the sanctity of the church, insisting that protests should not come at the expense of peace and safety. The pastor's statement was both a defense of his congregation and a condemnation of the protesters' methods. He made it clear that the church would consider all options to respond. The message was firm. The church would stand up for its right to worship without fear. Parnell's words resonated with many who saw the protest as a violation of sacred space. The church community rallied around his call for respect and order. The incident became a defining moment for the congregation. The pastor's response set the tone for what would come next. Pastor Parnell's response went beyond condemnation. He called on government leaders to act. He urged local, state, and national officials to protect the right to worship in peace. Churches, he argued, are sanctuaries, places of solace and comfort for communities. When that peace is shattered by aggressive protests, the very purpose of the church is threatened. Parnell called for laws protecting religious freedom to be enforced. He insisted that the right to protest does not include the right to intimidate or disrupt worship. The pastor's appeal was a plea for civility and respect for sacred spaces. He wanted assurance that congregations could gather without fear. The safety of religious gatherings, he said, is a community issue requiring attention from leaders. Parnell's call was a forward-looking step aimed at preventing future disruptions. He asked for a renewed commitment to both freedom of speech and freedom of religion. The message: protect the peace of worship for all. After the protest, city's church leaders had to decide how to move forward. Pastor Parnell announced the church was seeking legal advice, considering possible action against the protesters. Consulting lawyers showed the church was taking the incident seriously. Legal counsel would help determine if laws were broken and what steps to take. Beyond legal action, the church focused on healing its community. Leaders offered support and reassurance, working to restore a sense of safety. The church also reviewed its security procedures, balancing openness with protection. Training staff and considering new measures became priorities. The goal: prevent future disruptions and rebuild trust within the congregation. The church's response was both practical and pastoral, addressing immediate needs and long-term security. The incident at City's Church drew swift attention from government officials. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi responded, signaling the seriousness of the event. She spoke directly with Pastor Parnell, showing federal engagement. Bondi described the protest as both an attack on law enforcement and intimidation of Christians. She promised the Department of Justice would act if state leaders did not. The statement put pressure on local authorities and raised the stakes. Federal prosecution became a possibility, turning a local protest into a national issue. Bondi's words were both a warning to protesters and a promise of support to the church. The government framed the disruption as a violation of fundamental rights. The response ensured the incident would be debated far beyond St. Paul. The church became a symbol in the national conversation about protest, law enforcement, and religious freedom. The high-level reaction underscored the event's significance. The message: places of worship would be protected from similar disruptions. The events at City's Church forced communities everywhere to reflect. The incident highlights the delicate balance between the right to protest and the right to worship in peace. For protesters, it was a way to demand change on immigration. For churchgoers, it was a violation of sacred space. The clash raises tough questions. Where is the line between protest and disruption? How do we protect both free speech and religious freedom? The strong emotions on both sides reflect deep national divisions. The protest was a symptom of a larger debate, showing how national issues play out locally. The incident challenges communities to find respectful, constructive ways to disagree. It's a reminder that protecting everyone's rights requires ongoing effort and empathy. For churches, it means rethinking security. For protesters, reconsidering strategy. Ultimately, the story urges us to seek common ground, even in moments of conflict.